Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Company Road podcast. We recently wrapped up last month's focus, which was around trends and innovations with some amazing guests. So definitely urge you to listen back to some of those shows if you've had to miss them for some reason. But moving on, we're going to move into our next big theme this month, which is all about overcoming challenges at work and how to weather the storm and build strategies for resilience, and how we navigate financial challenges in business and some of the commercial trickiness that's in there. And as always, we're going to start with a focus area, a particular area of experience or expertise, which in this week's episode is going to be the widely practiced area of research. And qual and quant in all its glory and other things, which many of you will have needed to work with or will over the course of your careers. It's really important. It's usually nestled in there in the business world in some way, and there's some very skilled people that do this work. So as my first specialist researcher on the show, so Joel Vermaas, a very huge welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks, Chris. Thank you for having me along. Looking forward to having a conversation.
Good. So Joel, you're the founder of Vibrant Insights, which is you do market research, insights, and strategy, and you say you're at the intersection of commercial work and community, which is a cool take on research and how that all works, because often it's not that. But you're helping brands thrive, and you've been in research for a long time, so nearly 2 decades, and you've worked at some of the world's leading quant agencies as well. You started Vibrant Insights, which is your own offer out in the market to demonstrate that businesses can balance mindful approaches while remaining commercially viable, which is really cool and really interesting as a niche. And you're well placed for this chat today. We'll get into the weeds, but let's just start with a big question. So the practice of research today, what it was like maybe 20 years ago, or however far back you want to go, but when you first started out, was it the same? What's changed about it? Is there stuff that's kind of carried through, and what's your read on it at the minute?
Oh, big question. Love it. I think a lot of things have changed. A lot of things have stayed the same. So if we start with what's changed, if I think back to when I first started my career, and this is going back to the dark ages, we were still doing face-to-face interviews and knocking on people's doors and all that kind of stuff. So thinking back to those days when it was central recruitment, bring a person into the office, we get them to sit and watch an ad, or we'd have a conversation with them, pen and paper. That went to a little coding room where people would code things into a PC, and we're working with, back then, Quanvert, built for Windows 3.1. Like, it was all old school, pen and paper, face-to-face, a lot of that sort of stuff. That's changed rapidly. I mean, we're seeing more digital methods now. We're seeing mobile-enabled surveys. Unfortunately, we've seen incentives drop. So back in those days, we're paying people $75 to $120 for their time. Now you're not really getting anywhere near that. This is 20 years ago, and that was a lot of money. Incentives have dropped. Attention spans have dropped. The methods have moved now to be more digital. You can't expect a person to spend 20 minutes on a survey anymore. It's maybe 10 or 12 minutes before data suffers. So I think a lot of the things in terms of how we collect the data, how we speak to people, the methods we use to recruit people, the attention spans, even the time we have a project, which used to be 2-3 months to do a project, it's now, can we get a result in 2 or 3 days? So I think we've seen a compression of everything, but I think the practice of research remains the same, right? It's about a client having a need, needing some intelligence, needing a consumer view, bringing the consumer into the boardroom so they can make decisions with confidence. So the heart of it, I think, is still the same. It's still about finding answers to business questions, but the tools, the techniques, the ways we do that, how we find people, how we collect the data, and how we analyze it, all that has become quicker and more sophisticated.
Yeah. And do you think the demands from a leadership point of view in terms of the people that are briefing the work and, trying to frame up what it needs to be, do you think those have become, greater basically than they were to begin with?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're probably dealing in lots of competing forces. Business budgets are being squeezed. They're needing to do more with less. Headcounts are down. The sophistication of what they know now is growing, and they're scaffolding on existing knowledge. So the demands of what they have to do to succeed are just getting greater. At the same time, the remit of what they're doing is expanding, and the market is just more challenging. So I can see a lot more pressure on them, which ultimately translates to what we need to do and helping them to navigate. I mean, at the end of the day, they're people, right? And they've just got more pressures in both their personal and their business lives. And our job is to help them navigate that successfully and making their lives easy.
Yeah, and then from a practitioner's point of view, I mean, there are people that are now probably more able to do research than they were before, given the tools that are available, we know about and we use as well. But, they're not always, bread and butter kind of researchers, and they've come from many walks of life basically to basically apply what they know to an existing brief or to an existing challenge, and they're able to work on projects in some capacity. I mean,
I think the age-old joke about research is, go to any conference and ask anyone how they ended up there. I'd say probably 99% of people have stumbled into the industry and then just kind of hang around. I think it's an industry that very few people want to get into. And being honest, it doesn't sound very sexy, right? So you do focus groups and you call people during dinner and ask them to do surveys. So I think as an industry, it's not that exciting. But I think as a pathway to come in, if you've got the passion, enthusiasm, come on in. Certainly in my role as hiring people, we've seen lots of different backgrounds. Some of the most successful researchers I've seen, one is a forensic toxicologist. How do you go from that to market research? Another person had a major in political science. I think ultimately what it comes down to is the curiosity, the mental agility, and the drive is ultimately what's going to set you up. So I think it doesn't really matter where you've come from, what you've done, what degree you've got behind you. As long as you're passionate, you're going to thrive here.
Yeah. And what do you think you need to become accredited in some way, or to feel like, you've made the right steps to kind of show that you're qualified in some way or another? What's looking good at the minute? What do people need?
Again, probably one of the great things about how the industry has changed is 20 years ago, it was all in textbooks, right? And the internet was very, very new back then. Whereas now the amount of knowledge you've got at your fingertips is just enormous and expanding. So I'd encourage anyone to go out and just read widely, whether you're looking at things like Green Book Blog, you're looking at the Research Society here in Australia, ESMR, whatever's coming out. There's lots of really good content to upskill yourself with. Listening to podcasts like Company Road is a great way as well to educate yourself and hear how professionals are talking. I think the first step is just boning up on the differences between tools and techniques and approaches. But then it's also just getting your hands dirty. There's no substitute for going out there, doing the work, working in a company and working alongside leaders who can help show you how it actually works in practice. Theory is great, but no research plan ever saw first contact with the respondent. So getting in there and doing the work is how you kind of skill yourself up. And then beyond that, it's just ongoing professional development. The Research Society and the Australian Data Insights Association, they've got regular conferences, training programs, industry nights, where you can start to push yourself, learn about AI tools, learn about design, all sorts of stuff, all the way up to getting accredited as a qualified professional researcher.
Yeah, I think it can start in that sort of observations, in that observation mode where you're basically, this is how I started doing it. It was basically looking at a load of reports because you're into some client's business. And, usually when you're getting on board with that sort of stuff, there's a lot of documentation, and some of it is PowerPoint presentations that, your marketing team, your product team put together or whatever it is. Some of it will be research that brings to life, what customer or the consumer is needing in some way, or the market need is, or it can be futures or trends or anything really. But yeah, I felt like that was a really good entry point to really understand how data was basically presented and how information was organized. And that kind of piqued my curiosity, which I think other people might relate to. And then you're thinking, okay, well, if that's the report and it's 300 pages of it, however long it is, I used to be like that anyway, but I was like, give me the 1-page version. But yeah, it just feels like there's kind of ways to engage with information, and you or anyone will find a way to think about what's interesting to them. And researchers can obviously then go into different industry specialisms and different fields and be quite narrow and quite focused on something if they feel really passionate about that. But then as a practitioner, you're thinking, okay, well, how do I build from that information as it's presented into design of that process in one way or another to get to that output? And I think that's where it kind of gets a bit more interesting, to be honest. Like, I feel like the end report is the end report, and you and I both have our views on what makes for a good report and what doesn't. There's still a lot of fairly generic research happening out there. Yeah, from your point of view, do you think that it's based on the definition of the brief, or the writing of the brief that kind of determines how good the research is, or do you think it's down to the research practitioner to make sure that it's a good standard?
I think it's probably a bit of both, being honest, Chris. I think part of it is the clearer the brief, both the brief and the brief behind the brief. So asking the question to the client to understand the business context, the macro context, where that's coming from. I think you need to really get into your client's business and understand what challenges they're facing to design a good research program. And then I think it comes down to that practitioner as well. One of the most staggering things, which sounds obvious when you say it, but when you kind of think about it a bit more, we're all guilty of this. Ritson reposted 1998 HBR article entitled Backwards Market Research. And the idea was start with the end in mind. Think about what those 2, 3, 4 killer charts are going to be that you put in front of your client. That's where you need to get to. It's X% of people think this, or this is the size of the opportunity. Take a step back. What is the data we need to collect to do that? And take a step back. How do we design a program to collect that data to get us to that spot? Sounds really obvious, but I think most researchers, particularly when you start, there's a tendency to, let's just do a really big survey or lots of focus groups and let's collect lots of data and let's chart up lots of things. And then hopefully we'll shake it up and something will come out of it. And that's where I think the olden days of 300-page reports used to happen. No one reads the things, right? They say, what's the summary? And the rest of it sits in a drawer and never gets opened again. I think as researchers, the more we can do backwards market research and land on here are the top 3 takeaways, that's where the gold is going to come from. But that only works if you understand the brief. So I think it's a hand-in-glove approach of the practitioner having the bravery to think, what is the end outcome? But having the bravery to ask the client, where do we need to get to? And really understanding what the brief is and the brief behind the brief.
Yeah, I want to be maybe a little bit more specific on that outcome as well, because I think that, putting it bluntly, I think a lot of clients out there, organizations out there are trying to prove something that they feel is true already, right? So they're leading the research to a certain conclusion. So the outcome is not like the outcome that the boss says is the outcome. So it needs to be done in a way that basically makes for a fair comparison of a few different outcomes to get to the outcome that is the final one. To prove or disprove, I think that process of thinking about hypotheses and thinking about what you want the research to prove is an interesting one. So you're thinking about, yes, the outcome, the end result, probably, what is the value from it in some sort of way? and then you're thinking, okay, well, if I need to get to that, then what would be the questions that we would need to ask and have answered? And I usually think that then informs like methodology in some sort of way. How do we find these things out? What do we want to find out? How we can do it, and then after that, obviously, the whole thing can get designed up and hopefully get to where you want to get to. But there are many kind of wrong turns. It feels like you can make. What are some of the things that you see all the time as being like, oh no, not again. This is happening again. What do you see?
Yeah, I think there's probably from 2 sides. Like as researchers, I think going in with assumptions, thinking you kind of who you need to speak to, what kinds of questions you need to ask. I think you need to have a good idea, but you need to go in with an open mind and not let your own ideas sway things. Hypotheses are great because from a hypothesis, you can challenge that and either confirm or refute it, which is powerful. And I think having a stance is good. But I think having that open mind, going in, not wanting to see a certain result is really important. Take a stance by all means, but don't try and manufacture the result. I think probably people trying to over-egg something, when it becomes we'd like to know A and B and C all the way up to Z. And I think you get into this habit of trying to do too many things half well and nothing gets done well. So I see that a lot. Research programs that become over bloated. I see surveys or focus group discussion guides that they load up way too much content, and it means people get fatigued, they get exhausted. The quality data you get is shocking, so you can't make decisions off that. And then I think the tendency as well to just chart out everything, to go, here's every possible data point under the sun, and not have the bravery to say, here's what we found, here's what you should do next. So I think those are some of the common pitfalls. But I mean, the brief behind the brief is another interesting one. You spoke earlier and you and I had conversations about the disaster scenarios, and I won't name brands, but it's probably one of the worst moments of my professional career. But it was an NPS program for a brand, and we'd gone through this process of conducting the data. We got this amazing data set. There's some really nice insights. There's some overlays of kind of COVID. And the conversation came back, which was, this is all great, but hey, this affects bonuses. So we need to find a way to make NPS the same. And it's like...
Yeah, I've heard this one as well. I've had this one too.
And it's like, hey, NPS softened slightly, but the fact that it's only dropped a few points is remarkable. Like, you think about what COVID has done to your business, the industry, the world. Hey, this is a great result. Yeah, but there's a bonus involved, so we need you to manufacture a result to make sure that NPS is the same as last year. Now, I professionally stepped back from that and said, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I'm not willing to manipulate data in order to manufacture a result. I think that's, again, an example of where, that's a pitfall of making the research have to show something because there's an agenda behind it. I'm not sure how you navigate that other than professionally stepping back and saying, as a qualified researcher, I can't touch this. But yeah, that's a challenging one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's I think misuse of data is always there. Like the fact that there is a 300-page report, a researcher might say, okay, well, we're putting this report together in case it gets into somebody else's hands. Is like usually it's along those lines. Basically, you're thinking, okay, well, put this amazing report together. I don't want any of the information to be taken out of context, and in fact, it takes on that kind of guise of a legal document in some sort of way because you leave it there and it's on the client's desk, kind of. You think, okay, well, that's good, that's job done, you walk away. You don't want anything to be kind of misinterpreted or misused. So all of the way in which the information is shown, obviously, is watertight. You've got sourcing and all the things that you need to put through it, references and footnotes and caveats and everything else that goes into those documents. But yeah, it just feels like no matter what you do, like a stat and a percentage is going to get lifted out and somebody will use it in the wrong way at some point. But you can only try, right?
Which I also find staggering, though, the amount of times where you think about priority project. It's like, here's when we deliver the report, but hey, we need a top line 2 weeks before then. And the amount of times that I've seen decisions made off top line data and off we go. I mean, there's a great quote by one of the senior marketers at Coca-Cola who challenged all research and said, your whole idea of 95% confidence level, he said, I don't need to know after 3 quarters that you're 95% confident my brand is in decline. Tell me at quarter 1 at 80% because I need to take action now. So I think there's also a balance point between rigor, defensibility, needing to go to that nth degree of scientific rigor, which can hamstring the whole thing. And you and I have had conversations about this at length. The challenge between UX and pivoting an entire team of devs after one interview, which is probably way too loose, versus traditional research scientific method, which takes 6 months and involves tens of thousands of people. I think we need to find a balance point between those two. I think, a lot of decisions get made on imperfect information, but if we're 80% of the way there and we can act in 2 weeks, do we really need to get to 90% after 6 months? I think the balance point is important to find.
Yeah, I think there's also, you'll be seeing this as well, but in terms of this month's theme where we're looking at business adaptability a little bit, overcoming challenges and, weathering the storm and preparing businesses for resilience and that kind of thing. It feels like jumping out of a longer term need for, research to really be like extensively worked on and then outputting, very, very deep results essentially is kind of, I mean, that still does exist, but I feel like there's more of a willingness now that I'm seeing anyway with some of the clients that I work with to accept that imperfect data is actually okay a little bit and to kind of work with indicative but lesser formed data points and conclusions from research than perhaps before. So it doesn't need to be, empirically kind of tested and crossed off to the letter as much as it maybe once did. And I know that's only in relation to perhaps more in products and service design areas where that kind of appetite for risk and failure and experimentation is actually, so everyone's okay with that a little bit. That's just part of what we have to do to be able to make progress in some way. And then you kind of build in your fidelity and you build in your understanding over time. What dynamics are you seeing? Are you seeing anything like that, or are you seeing other organizations that are still needing to do the belt and braces, 600 pages now, not 300, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I'm seeing a real balance. I'm seeing some clients who they're embracing, let's learn fast, fail fast, and move on. But then equally, I've worked with clients where you do need to have the rigor behind it. I had one client who was making several $1 million worth of CapEx decisions. We're talking investing in new line capability in new states to develop entirely new product substrates, brand extensions, product extensions. And, when it's a multi-million-dollar decision that you can't really recoup those costs as easily, then you do need to have the rigor behind it. And that's when the level of approach and confidence needs to go up. So I'm definitely seeing some move to that, but I'm also seeing still some more kind of traditional methods when you think about choice modeling to really give confidence of what's the opportunity here, what's the upside. Is it worth us investing several million into this line capability, yes or no?
Yeah. Can you explain choice modeling to people that may not know what it is?
Yeah, totally. I love choice modeling.
Yeah, me too.
it's a really fun technique, right? So the best way to think about choice modeling and to see it in real practice is if you've ever bought private health insurance, if you've ever bought a mobile phone or internet plan, that's probably been designed using choice modeling. And to be honest, a lot of products you see on shelves today are being designed using choice modeling. That goes into the type of packaging it comes into, the label design, the substrate it's in, i.e. the type of packaging, whether it's plastic or cardboard or whatever it might be, all the way through to the pricing strategy over a 52-week year. And basically the idea behind choice modeling is that people don't make decisions one by one. We don't make a decision and think about, well, let's take private health insurance. You don't think about dental in isolation, and you don't think about optical in isolation. You tend to think about what's the right mix for me. Human nature is we want to maximize and minimize. Maximize my benefit, minimize my cost. So if you do a standard research study and you say, hey, what would you like included? Everything, please. How much of that would you like? Well, as much as I can get. And how much do you want to pay? As little as I can get. It's not pragmatic for businesses to design that kind of product. So choice modeling basically says to a person super easily, hey, here's 3 products. What would you choose? A, B, or C? And through that, we've got a range of different attributes, and each of those have levels. So again, using private health insurance, here's the price with different levels underneath that. Here's the brand that provides it. Here's the level of optical. Here's the level of dental. Here's any additional inclusions. We move through that. For a person, it's an easy decision. Here's 3 products. I like that one. Great. Here's another 3 products. What would you choose? Great. Here's another 3 products. Super simple. They're evaluating things as a whole, gestalt type psychology. In the back end as a researcher, we get this amazing data set where we've designed this approach and we get this data at the back end that we can see, right, everything together, how much of a role does brand, price, inclusions play on overall behavior? Fabulous. That's a really good start. Then we can take a step further and say, right, let's look at pricing. How sensitive are people to pricing levels? How sensitive are people to the amount they get back? Fabulous. Lots of really nice data in there. Then we can take a step further and go, let's construct a product. If it looks like this, how much of the market share do we capture? What happens if we vary? So let's include this, let's drop that out. What does that do to behavior? What happens if our competitors respond? So let's model those scenarios and do some war games. So you get this really nice ability to understand deep market dynamics and inform incredibly nuanced product decisions. And then you can run things out like, what's the cost to serve that? Can we include something that's very cheap for us to do for the consumer that has enormous value to them, where we can optimize maximum market share by doing something simple like that? Or this costs us a lot, so if we drop the level of this but include that, we can get the same share. So for product holders through to actuaries, through to marketers, it's such a powerful tool to understand the market at such a profound level and really get deep and down and dirty on configuring the right product to maximize benefit to consumers and your organization. It's just awesome.
I love it. I love the passion in the way you're describing that as well. You're getting into it. This is good.
That's also why I got into this gig, right? Like as an industry, I think, we spoke earlier about the lack of sexiness around research, but the truth is there's not many industries where every day you rock up and it's different. Like in a typical day, I'm looking at my email now and I'm working from consumer goods, frozen consumer goods, to funerals, cremations, memorializations. Like, tell me about that variety where suddenly you're learning about some of the hardest moments in a person's life. And I'm not talking about what to have for dinner tonight, all the way through to buying homes, buying cars, through to your private health insurance. Like the variety of what we deal with is enormous and it keeps the brain ticking over. I love it as an industry because I'm always learning new things and always pushing myself into new directions. And I think that's where the fun and excitement comes from. It's a great job to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's great to hear. Hey, coming back to choice modeling, I kind of want to just come back to a point that you made there, which is probably around the more the structuring of it a little bit. But in terms of, I guess this is coming from what I see is that sometimes research and what we're trying to find out from the research is quite narrowly cast. And choice modeling obviously gives the opportunity for a lot of people to bring other propositions and other things in to test in one way or another. But actually, what I see a lot is that product or service design is actually over niche, and you're basically going in and you're trying to either focus on one feature or focus on something that's kind of at a lower level, basically. Does it work or does it not? If it works, then we go and make it. But one feature can sit within, a big backlog, if it goes for months or years. You might not get the kind of the benefit from the perspective that you're describing if you were to do choice modeling and you kind of lift it up into a higher proposition type area. So for anyone out there that is maybe navigating that space where they're basically in delivery mode or in design mode and they're having to work on something that's a little bit more narrow, how would you suggest that they elevate that conversation to something that could compare a set of features or feature clusters together to get to a better output?
I think probably one of the best things to think about is choice modeling is used to validate. It's not an exploratory tool, it's a validatory tool. So I think when you're getting down to that level, you need to really know all the data points of what you want to test in that model. Choice modeling is one of the best examples of garbage in, garbage out. If you try and design something too big and too lumbering, you get nothing on the back end that you can use. So I would encourage anyone traveling through that to think, how can we start to reduce the available set of variables or the attributes that go into there? Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. And there's some great techniques, and I work with some brilliant analytics folk who help navigate this where, bringing in two-step models where we explore something outside of that and pull through the winner into the main model. So there's ways you can kind of prioritize what goes into there, but I think probably try not to bite off too much. There's nothing wrong with having two bites of the cherry, so to speak. Do the work first, understand those features, those benefits, help prioritize those, get some good job to be done, type prioritization happening. Once you kind of know what you're working with, then pull into the choice model rather than trying to layer too much into there. Otherwise, you just spend a lot of money to spin your wheels and not find out a whole lot that a simple stage of research before could have very quickly separated out what you need to do and where you need to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, this is the eternal debate, isn't it? When are you using what research methodology? And it's the qual, quant, qual, whatever it is, whatever the combo is, but it feels like it feels like a power move in a video game or something where you're trying to play out the things in the right order to get the best result. What are you seeing there? Has anything changed there from your point of view?
Oh, absolutely. I think the elephant in the room of what we're all dealing with is AI. And I'm seeing that start to fundamentally change how we approach research. I mean, right now it's things like AI-based moderators, which means we can go out at scale and collect qualitative data at quantitative scale incredibly quickly, almost overnight. We can have thousands of one-to-one evolving conversations. Does it replace having a very clever human sitting opposite a person and picking up on that facial expression? Or, hey, I noticed you hesitated there. Can we just pause and explore that? And I can't do that yet. So I think there's still power in having people, but that gives us the ability to do qual at quant scale. I think some of the quant tools we're seeing are running quicker and quicker and quicker, which means seeing clients now, 24-hour turnaround. Something goes in, program it yourself, launch it, here's the answer, we can scaffold and move on very quickly. So I think we're starting to see those things happen more and more and more, but I think there's also a need to stop and pause and think before we jump on some other things. I can certainly see that accelerating. And then all the way through to the people. Synthetic users are a growing category. There's numerous suppliers now who are saying, hey, we can scan all this information, create a synthetic pool of users that never get tired, never get exhausted, never bow out, that you can start to explore and push on and really get to know. Where the limits of that are depends on whether we're talking about something people love discussing, like automotive or sporting teams or alcohol, or something that no one wants to talk about, like, I don't know, cleaning your ears. I don't know. I suspect people don't spend a lot of time on Reddit forums talking about which brand is the best Q-tip. So I think the training data will vary. But I can see synthetic users also helping with getting a lot of knowledge very quickly before you then move out and speak to a wider base of real humans.
Yeah, I mean, from a decisioning point of view, we're talking a bit about weathering a storm and how to build resilience, but actually your data set is key, really. I mean, it feels like your confidence from that research would need to be either proven or it's a bit of a gamble, basically, if you're going out into unknown data sets or methodologies. So I know some organizations, and I've worked with some already, that are building those synthetic customer profiles and personas and using that as a design tool to essentially skyrocket through Gen AI, they're skyrocketing their ideation innovation process, which is kind of cool. But at the same time, you've got to wonder about its limitations and, like you say, the nuance there. And as a research and innovation practitioner, I'm always thinking, okay, there are some things that it could tell you, but it's basically working with a limited data set. And it's not designed to basically stretch or pivot out into different lateral and more abstract trains of thought that might take you as like, okay, well, I'm facilitating you today and I have my list of 10 questions, but because we're talking about the things that we've kind of covered that, I can see it's going down a certain path and we're talking about the same things that I cover in every podcast. I'm now going to give you another 6 questions that will just be totally random based on something that you've said. It's a bit more generative in the moment rather than, just kind of based on a pattern or something. So I think there's a degree to which we need to navigate that still. And it feels like the results from those tests are still a little bit unproven. Have you seen anyone out there that's kind of doing it well?
I think the people who are selling it like to say they're doing it well.
Yeah.
Here's some great case studies conveniently. I think, as I said earlier, to your point, I think it's the quality of data set. And it's how good your training data is to build the synthetic user. So think about if you're scraping information from Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, Whirlpool, whatever forum you've got, if it is something that people discuss at length and they do get quite passionate about, I suspect you've got some wonderful training data that you can start to explore. Things like different brands of beer, and if you're into your kind of microbreweries, I suspect you'll see a lot of really good conversation, people waxing lyrical. Your training data set will be phenomenal. But as I said, I think there's certain categories where people just don't engage in that level of conversation. So your learning and ability to kind of speed rocket your innovation pipeline is going to be exceptionally limited. So I think big categories of lots of conversation, probably right. Maybe in time we'll have the leap where things that people aren't discussing, we can get there. Certainly looking at some of the stuff Ritson is doing, he's used the example of sporting teams and he's used the auto example, and I think maybe a beer example, where they've been able to get really good results from synthetic users, positioning map or where brands are positioned, generating the statements and the map itself using synthetic data and replicating that with real people and being able to get very, very close. So I think that gap will get narrower and narrower, but I think at the same time, I would view this the same way as syndicated. If you are using the same data set that everyone else is using and you're using the same tools, how much of a competitive advantage do you have there? It's going to come back to the humans that wield it and the creatives that start to design it. And I think the more we move into creative solutions and innovative solutions, the more we need smart humans directing the tools and coming up with the ideas. And I think the more we move down that path, the more you need real humans evaluating them. At the end of the day, something new and novel, the AI might fail because it is new and novel, whereas a human might say, that's actually genius and it solved the problem I have.
Yeah. I mean, I see a great weight of data being processed and obviously observation being made. But I always find, certainly in the work that I teach as well, it's that leap between basically seeing what everything's telling you and actually making the stretch into something new or something fresh that's often missing. So even from the point of view of writing insights, insight could just be, it could be written as an observation. 6 out of 10 people are saying this or doing this, but it's not really an insight. And given that your company is called Vibrant Insights, I'd love to hear about those and how you do it and how you recommend people come to think of insights, because I think it's really important. I think the distinction is really important to kind of elevate the thinking a little bit and to give that human interpretation as you've described.
So I can give you a really nice example of that. We recently did a project called Dream Over. I worked very closely with a partner of mine at the Owl Insights. And I was looking at kind of the journeys to property and how people feel about property and wealth creation. And one of the questions we asked in there was, why do you think people choose to own property? Open-ended kind of free text. We took that, we pumped it through, ironically enough, an AI tool which looks for the underlying emotion. What was really interesting under that is a lot of the narrative and the feedback coming out was quite negative. There's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, a lot of seeking reassurance coming through. And the way to kind of think about, to my mind, to your point, there's observations, which is the what. Push that further. So what? What does that mean? What's the implication behind that? That's the insight you need to get to. And what we found was, you think about why someone might want certainty. It's because they feel uncertain. Why someone might want reassurance. It's because they are feeling a lack of reassurance. They're feeling a lack of confidence. So they want these things because there's an absence thereof. And it sounds really twee, but it's a nice kind of insight, at least from what our clients seem to say. It's people aren't chasing the property dream. They're trying to avoid a property nightmare now. It's the, I don't want to be beholden to a landlord anymore. I don't want to have to worry about my rent going up every other month. I don't want to have to worry about needing to move. So suddenly the great Australian dream of big home, backyard, place for the kids to run around, my own little slice of Australia, is now avoiding the property nightmare of being beholden to a landlord or having rents go up or having Maslow's hierarchy. You need for shelter removed from you. So that to me was a really nice example, and I didn't necessarily come up with it. My partner did, so I can kind of toot his horn a little bit. I think it's a beautiful insight, right? And that's where you go from, yes, people want reassurance. So what? Because they're not feeling reassurance. Well, so what? Because there's so much uncertainty around property. Okay, great. Now what? If you're now thinking about a brand and how you play into that space, how do we offer people that reassurance? How do we demonstrate empathy and respect? And hey, it is hard out there. Hey, there is a lot of uncertainty. How do we give you that reassurance about a place to live and help you own a property because it removes all those stresses? Do we bring out 10-year leases because that gives you the reassurance? Do we bring out 100-year leases, which is not that uncommon overseas? So I think that level of what, so what, now what is a way to help you move from data to insight and strategy.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I want to build on that as well, because something that I use is almost a consequential thought process that builds out from there as well. So if you land on that insight, then you can think, okay, well, what's the counter to that insight? So in that case, the fact that people want to stay in own property or they're motivated by own property is kind of showing you one area, but it's also revealing that people want to stay in rent for some reason as well. So what would be the insight around that? Why is that affording them more flexibility than they would otherwise get if they were needing to buy a house and, the variable rates are going up and down? You don't want to jump into that too soon without some consideration too. So I think there's always a counter to what the insight statement is there is then showing you. And then you can also follow it on and on through. So it's, if that, like you say, what's the so what, the now what, but how many versions of that extension can you make? And still be confident, obviously, that it's not just made up. You got to situate it in the truth and the data that you've got. But I think that could be an interesting thinking tool. It's interesting to hear you talk because you're obviously passionate about it. You've set up Vibrant Insights, which is obviously, coming at it from a less mechanical standpoint, and you talk about positivity and community within your proposition as well. I'm wondering how you're seeing research being used in that way, in a way that can be purposeful and for good, some of the things that you describe in the way that you've set up your business.
Totally. So it's interesting thinking about kind of the genesis of where Vibrant Insights came around, and working at lots of businesses and kind of seeing the way in which the commercials were set up. It struck me that in both those businesses, but business more broadly, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money moving through. There's a lot of profit. And I started to think about where that profit goes in this idea of a finite world, but we're living infinitely. And I thought, if someone just forgoes that new car or forgoes that third home, whatever it might be, the rich owner, the CEO, the white collar exec, if they took that money from that home and used that for good, what could that do? Where could we unlock goodness? And I remember listening to a TED talk about a guy who created charity, and it was a whole left of center charity where he hired the best CEOs and he paid them CEO salaries, and he hired the best marketers, he paid them marketer salaries, and was successful and it was amazing. But when you looked at the dollar cost per person they helped, it was way off the charts compared to other charities. And it shut down because people had this feeling like, as a charity, we can't spend too much money. We can't be seen to hire CEOs at CEO wages. But the truth is, the person you give $1 to who needs it, they don't care whether it costs you 10 cents to make that dollar or $5 to make that dollar. That dollar has the same value to them. So for me, it was thinking through, I don't want to get away from doing great commercial work. I love doing commercial work. I love pushing myself. I love playing with innovation. I like being at the forefront of where companies can go, but I also want to feel good about what I do. So that was, how do I find a way to do cutting edge commercial work, but give back? And for me, that was, if we take 10% on profits, and that's mindful, it's profit, not revenue, but profit. Paid myself, I've paid my employees, I've paid all the suppliers I need to, everything's taken care of. Everyone's doing great and they're looked after. Why don't we take that profit pool and give that away? I'm not fussed. I've got my salary. I'm happy. Everyone else in the company is being paid industry wages. They're happy. Yes, we invest the rest of that into the next year's growth and hiring the next person, but gee, can't we do so much good? And then we can take some of that money we make and use that to fund pro bono, low bono work. So we can go out and find charities and help them. So for me, it was how we balance commercial work and doing really good forward-thinking research, but using that to support all the way through to, as I said, pro bono, low bono, helping charities that couldn't afford research, which helps with informing how they develop their marketing plans, their communication plans, what their supplier bases are, how they segment the market to find the highest value so they can continue to exist, all the way through to government and social work, informing policy, informing behaviour change, working with Victorian and Australian government and various agencies thereof to help them understand how they do what they do. Where do we need to go? How do we encourage data sharing so we can identify at-risk individuals, all that kind of jazz. So I think research and bringing people's needs into the boardroom, into the decision makers' laps is so important, whether that's government and social or whether through corporate, because of what that can allow us to do.
That's really important work, I think. And it obviously elevates the meaning of the work really to be much broader than what it would otherwise be, And I think that step and that leap is often, it could be done, but is often not done. If you're thinking about anyone within an organization who's doing some research or is leading a project, the broader societal, the broader purpose, the impact for that work could be considered to a great degree. I know other organizations that I've worked with, consultancies and otherwise, but you're thinking about how do you align your business and your goals to the UN sustainability goals, for example, and how do you basically show that you're contributing positively? And it feels like that will be becoming more important. So as things get a bit more commoditized and a bit more AI generated, it just feels like it might afford us time to think about some of these things. So there's efficiencies here, but actually the flip from that and the pivot from that could be into other more value driving areas, right? If we had a bit more time, then we might think, okay, well, I've got a day a week and I can do this pro bono work, or I can help another business or another team out. And are you seeing any of that working now, or is it something that we're still, sort of working towards?
I think it's been very positive from when I started Vibrant, and it's only been a couple of years or 3 years now, and really wanted to have that strong sense of kind of social and community justice. I'm seeing a lot of organizations step up massively in that game. I mean, the rise of the B Corp has been phenomenal to see. More organizations now who are giving people more days to donate to charity and go out and do volunteer work. So I think we're seeing the narrative change, which is wonderful. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think one of the other things for me as a business, and I've kind of got two points which I wanted to touch on. One for me as a business is, the more successful business gets, the more funds you can free up, the more chance you have to employ people and give a go to people who wouldn't be given a go. So my cousin back in South Africa, he ran an IT company, and he used to go out and deliberately employ people who otherwise didn't have education, didn't have the background. He'd go into townships and find people who wanted to learn IT, and he would bring them in and he would teach them how to do this. So it's a very mindful approach of helping someone who otherwise would never be considered learn a skill and get employed. I'd love to do more of that at Vibrant, employ people who want to get in the industry who can't. The second thing which probably strikes me around business is, years ago I was chatting to a colleague and she was feeling quite bitter about what we did. She was a survey program, and she said, I program surveys to encourage people to buy more chocolate. It's soul-crushing work. I took a step back and I said to her, but think about what you're actually doing, right? Yes, it's a survey. Yes, it's to get people to buy more chocolate. Have you ever heard about the anatomy of a pencil? Have you heard this thinking about the anatomy of a pencil and what goes into it? So it's this beautiful story where someone said, take a pencil, humble pencil, bit of graphite in the middle of a bit of wood. Think about everything that goes into creating that pencil. Think about the person who cuts down the tree and them. So their lives, their jobs that you're employing because you buy that pencil. Think about the coffee that person who cuts down that tree drinks. Think about the truck driver who has to drive that coffee from the plantation to the processing plant. Like, all these things get connected to a humble pencil. A few cents to buy a pencil, but there's this enormous set of industries that sit behind that. And I also go, at the end of the day, our job, we help businesses succeed. We help them navigate a really complex world. We keep people in jobs. It's a really noble thing to do. We're helping business succeed. We're helping bring products to consumers. Now, if you work in tobacco, that's maybe a different conversation. And personally, we'll never go near tobacco. But a lot of what we do, Cadbury was started with the idea of bringing joy to people. It's a company that ultimately makes something people really enjoy and give them a dopamine hit. There's nothing wrong with helping that. And the people you employ along the way, the marketers, the truck drivers, the admin staff, everything we do keeps people in jobs, helps their kids have a future. So to me, there's also a purity around helping business succeed. There's a lot of people that we can help through that as well.
Yeah, cool. I mean, there's, well, maybe, I don't know if we'll get into the sugar pandemic and the ethics and everything else.
Well, that's a different conversation.
We could talk about that separately, but no, it just feels like, I mean, I think it's right to have noble ambition from the work that you do. And I'm thinking for the audience of this show, where you're entrepreneurs and you're in your business, and, it can feel in any day that you're basically not contributing to anything bigger than the task that is on your to-do list, right? So you're in a kind of delivery mode. But I think, you can string it together quite easily to kind of look at the broader impact from the point of view of, setting up a wellbeing initiative at work. You're thinking about how to run things more inclusively. From the example that you were giving in terms of recruitment, like you can be bringing in people that have a lesser opportunity and really pushing the agenda when it comes to, an open and fair recruitment policy that doesn't discriminate and just bring in more white people, probably male or I don't know, otherwise, people that are biased in a certain way. I think there's something about the fairness of, I want to say the fairness of research and how it's practiced, because as a researcher, you always think, I've got to be independent, I've got to be impartial, I've got to make sure that things are reported quite factually, and I've got to think about how that will be used, for good in some way or for purpose, or how the decisions can be made from it. So I actually think, based on what you're saying, that in you as a researcher, and anyone can learn from this as well, but there's kind of innate, it is curiosity as well, but it's an ability to basically navigate some of this kind of, there's a lot of ways in which the business could turn, and a lot of ways in which, people could, I want to say they kind of attach significance to certain areas, business priorities and areas and so on. But all of that, it can be done in a way that's fair, and it can be done in a way that kind of creates good and creates purpose. Now, what do you think about that?
Oh, I agree completely. I think increasing people want to see a sense of meaning in their lives. I think, if it's something we're doing a lot of, you're spending 40 hours a week, maybe 35, maybe 40, maybe 60, depending on where you're working. But you want to see some kind of meaning and some kind of reward out of that. And that can come from doing meaningful work because you might be working in social and government, all the way through to just having colleagues you really enjoy and a workplace that celebrates people and is inclusive and sees you as a human being. So I think there's lots of ways to find meaning and purpose in one's life. And that could be as simple as, hey, we've got a great office program around recycling, or, I just want to get home and help my plants grow because that feels like my own little slice of greenery and combating greenhouse emissions. Everyone finds their meaning in different ways, but I think organizations supporting people to be their best selves and finding ways to find meaning in their life is really important.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I mean, it's obviously where it needs to be. I mean, I feel like meaning from work is really key. And the point I was trying to make before is like the way in which you describe how you go about research, it can be applied to your day-to-day job. So, find meaning in the things that you do, and use a kind of, an open mind to kind of bring in the information that you need to be able to help facilitate decisions. I mean, it's all the stuff that research does, but you could apply it. Like anyone, if they're not a researcher, could just apply this stuff to their day-to-day and make something better of their working scenario, probably.
Oh, I absolutely agree. At the end of the day, if you can understand what it is you're trying to solve for and figure out a way in which is going to add benefit, absolutely convince the powers that be that there needs to be a new approach or something done differently in the organization that will benefit people. I think there's a very clever way of thinking that through and getting the outcome you want.
How do you handle closed-mindedness, from that point of view? So if you're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to gather the data that will lead to a positive outcome, but some people just don't want to hear the facts, right? When you're presenting back your report and it's to somebody who just has already made up their mind, they don't want to hear it. How do you respond then? You need to create that point of connection between, somebody white collar stakeholder person and the people that you're basically kind of shining a light on. It just feels like that gap is there. I mean, the slides can read, unfortunately, quite sort of statistically, or they can look like, scientific report results write up, which is done, in 5 bullet points on a slide or whatever. But actually, there are real people and situations behind this that you have to bring to life. And I feel like it's almost it's your responsibility to bring that voice into your business and into your organization. Like if you're dealing with the information, then how can you, I always say this to the students that I work with as well. So how can you humanize that? How can you make it a point of discussion or a point of connection in some way? And that can be done through, like you say, pen portrait, persona. You can bring in videos, you can use imagery, you can use quotes. Obviously, I've actually brought customers into businesses and run co-creation with them so that people, behind boardroom tables can actually see who these people are and what they need, So that can be helpful. But I think, you do need to kind of bridge that gap to the outside world. Otherwise, it's like you're working in a bubble with some like very small pieces of statistical information that then might lead to a solution. But without the connection points, it just feels like it's a bit of a one-sided view.
And I think probably building on that as well, Chris, it's your job there. If we kind of think about everything we've spoken about today, one is about taking a step to the backwards market research and what are we actually here to answer for? So if we've missed the mark, that could be the reason why that person's closed-minded, because we haven't understood the brief behind the brief. And that's a failing on us as researchers not to keep probing until we really understand the business challenge. Then it's also advancing that to, have we hit the so what and the now what? Have we hit the insight? Have we hit the strategy behind that? Because you can also see a person saying, well, you've just given me something that's challenged my worldview. I don't know what to do with that. And that's scary. And I'd much rather go back to my little bubble where it's comfortable and I know what's going on and I'll make decisions from here. Or it's a case of, I know this is scary because it's indicating, a market is declining. What do we do about that? How do we pivot? You think about the age-old Kodak story. You think about a business that deals in film and the rise of digital cameras. It's very easy to say, nope, film's never going to go anywhere. We're going to keep doubling down on this, and this is where it's going to go because this is safe and comfortable. Or you do the whole, well, now become a chemical company, and that's our gig. Or how do we double down on digital? Talking about so what, and now where do we go? Can remove that fear and insecurity from, I'd just rather double down and keep doing what I do because that's all I know.
Yeah, which I think is the constant dilemma, really, for a lot of people within these organizations, because what in terms of your bank of expertise is, that's your expertise, right? That's your value for being in that place at that time. So if you're coming in as the researcher, then I don't know, maybe some of those counter arguments or new ideas or the way in which you present the market or new consumer need, some of that might be a little bit unexpected, and it might go against what somebody or a team or what the business has stood for in the past. But I think people have to be more open to that. I think what you were saying about the speed of which research can now be conducted, that there really is no excuse in a way for being more in tune with some of those nuanced insights and market conditions, and you can be really responsive to that. It's just about, I think, facilitating the right conversation in a way that's probably less preachy, but also, it's collaborative. We're going to have to work this thing out together. We've got to figure out what to do with the information. It was interesting that this group was saying that, and that was the insight. And now we need to be quite pragmatic about how we're going to do something about it. So, I think using it as a conversation starter is usually really powerful, and framing it more as an insight is an insight, but it can be framed almost as a question or an opportunity for further exploration, really. And usually it is, because obviously you're not in the same discussion as you would be if you had a solution for that problem. It's not like you tell me the problem, I'll give you the solution, but it can just lead to that next step, the design process, which can be really critical. So lots of value in it. And I think navigating that in what we've all talked about, there's a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of speed, obviously, and there's a lot of data, and there's a lot of margin for error, right, within all of that. And I think, that's where a skilled leader or a skilled entrepreneur, will be able to kind of direct and manage some of those conversations, it feels. Along that line, is there anything, from your own, I guess, from your own skill set, from your own knowledge base, or any piece of advice that you give to people that are navigating in that area to make that situation work in some way?
Probably say the first piece of advice would be to keep exploring, keep asking. Start from a perspective of understand that person, that stakeholder, the business and their needs. I think, consulting can get quite a bad rap, But I think there's a lot of good in consulting, which is the power of asking why, the power of trying to understand and to keep exploring until you really know what the problem is at hand and then designing around that. I think then a fair dose of empathy. So once you kind of understand where that person's coming from, put yourself in their shoes and understand their position and understand why that might be challenging them. And then I think probably a fair bit of tact and delicacy and treating the person like another human that's sitting opposite you and working together as a solution. It's a subtle thing, but thinking about the conversation not like this, but a conversation side by side, and here is the problem we're trying to solve for together. It's a subtle repositioning, but it can help you solve those kinds of problems. And think about it in your own personal life. I often think as researchers, we end up in a very privileged position because I have suppliers I engage who provide services to me, and I reflect on what I need and how I want to work with them. And then I reflect on how that might translate to how I work with my clients. How are the ways in which I should be engaged, and what are some of the challenges they might be facing? And you can start to view upstream and downstream and think about it in that way. And that can start to become a way to break down those barriers. I mean, you were speaking about fear earlier, and it struck me when this whole AI thing kicked off a year or two ago. I was a very vocal opponent to AI. I was like, this is ridiculous. We should never do this. And that came from a place of fear, because as a small business, it's like all I've got are my skills and my experience and what I've done for a job. And I don't have enormous hardware capability to drive the stuff. I don't have teams of people to learn it. I don't have coding experience. This is going to kill my job. Like, how am I going to pay my mortgage and look after my 2 kids? Like, what am I going to do? So it's very easy to come from a place of fear and dig your heels and be like, absolutely not. But then the more you start to challenge that and go, well, how do I actually think this through? And what does it mean for me? And how can I actually leverage this and use this in the right way? Can move you from a place of fear and uncertainty to a place of here's the upside. In the same way, if someone is closed-minded, or what's the problem here I'm trying to solve, a fair dose of empathy and understanding can help you understand that person's challenge and let you help them navigate that. At the end of the day, businesses are run by people. People make decisions. Our job is working with people to understand people, to make decisions that benefit people. It's, you take all that away and it's a fellow human sitting opposite you. Treat them as such and try and understand their needs, and you'll get a hell of a long way there.
Yeah, we're in these situations a little bit. It feels like where you come up against a blocker, right? And it's, somebody responds to something a certain way, or it has to be a certain way, or there's something new to the market. AI is just coming along. It kind of prompts a thought process, and it prompts a kind of, it's like a provocation, and it kind of gets you to respond in some sort of way. You could choose whether to walk away from it and basically put your head in the sand, or you can accept that it's there, and actually think about how, right, it's there. So how am I going to make this work for us or for me, and just move on. And I think there's differences in approach there. And I think if you can work with the problem, then often that's a good starting point. I think for people out there that are aspiring leaders, that's a really helpful way into, more senior, more leadership, more strategic conversations as well, because you're basically showing that you're there to make positive of that situation in some way.
I think building on that as well, using those kind of research skills, approaching it from different angles. If you approach something in some way to try and work with a person and you hit a brick wall, don't keep doing that. That's insanity. Find a different way around that. I think about one person I work with for many years. He was a client, and we struggled at times, often. And he would get frustrated and I would get frustrated. And we found a way to work. And it wasn't until a couple of years later where he was in his 40s and he went to go and chat to a doctor, and he got diagnosed with Asperger's. And he's now a massive advocate and proponent of neurodiversity. And it's a superpower. It's a superpower in organizations to have a diverse workforce, be that of your background, ethnicity, or neurodiversity. And all of a sudden, everything made sense, because he was able to sit down in a meeting and say, hey, I'm not a person who understands and gets nuance and subtext, and I don't enjoy small talk, and I don't enjoy going for a coffee with you because I need to know the purpose of that. All of a sudden, you can have a conversation with this person because we now get each other. I'm not going to lay this little hint out there and softly around this. Hey, here's a solution and here's what's going on. Let's have a conversation. And bang, we're into solution mode. And this person has such a great mind that we cut out all that hard work of trying to find a way to navigate, We get to solution mode. Oh my God, he's a genius. And he solves these things so quickly because we're able to cut all that out. Now, that's an example of where he identified with time what he needed, and he was able to then set up meetings to say, this is how I need to run. I think as researchers, we can start to think about different ways to approach it, because someone may not know or may not recognize, and people are different. Some people are extroverted, some are introverted, some like data, some like stories. That's not a neurodiversity thing, that's a people thing. So taking those different runs at it. But I think also just opening a meeting, he gave this great example of open meeting to say, hey, are there any accommodations or ways we need to conduct today's meeting that would make it easier for anyone here to attend and contribute? It's a great way to open up for someone to say, actually, I just need a few minutes to think before I form a response. Fabulous. Thank you for letting me know. So when we have this discussion, let's now pause. Hey, so-and-so, I'd love to hear from you in a couple of minutes. Please form an opinion. Let's get back. Hey, so-and-so, can you now share your opinion? So I think just opening that up to understanding there's different ways people think. And as a researcher and as a leader, understanding how to get the most out of people, it's a powerful way of approaching relationships.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, it came up in the previous episode with Joel Hines just about storytelling, and it was all about connection before communication and that kind of thing. And it was very much about understanding that first. So I think if you can design that into your meeting cadence or whatever it is, then that can be a really useful starting point. And it just means that you can obviously, it's relatability that you can draw upon and come back to through various moments in a presentation, in a meeting, in a workshop, whatever it is. It's really cool. I'll maybe finish with just a question, which we've heard a lot, from you and how you approach this. And it's hugely practical chat that we've had today. I think there's a lot of people going to get from it. So thank you. But, what's kind of energizing you personally, and what drives you to work in this way, if you can break that down in some sort of way for the listeners?
I think probably a few things keep me here and keep me going. I think when I first started, it was the shininess of doing something new and the novelty, because human beings love novelty. I think that morphed into fear and terror of, I'm responsible for 2 kids and a mortgage. I need to keep a roof over these kids' heads. And now I think it's morphed into what keeps me going is a few things. I enjoy research because there's a process and there's a way of thinking through problems. And ultimately, regardless of what industry, it's the same kind of way of thinking it through. But the business challenges and the way what you're there to solve varies. And I think for me, it's the constant learning of new industries, new challenges, new people. As I said, moving from funerals and cremations to frozen goods, come on, so different in terms of what you're learning and how you're working. But also the people who work in there are so different. And the human beings you sit down opposite are so clever and so smart and have so many different stories that it's the vibe of doing that. Every day keeps me learning something new and keeps me guessing, and I love it. And also just the sense of purpose, knowing that we're doing good in the world without having to compromise on doing top shelf work. It's a hard balance to walk between being a bleeding heart versus just doing really good work. And there's a secondary benefit to community. So I think it's being able to look at my kids and say, I started this thing with a view to do good in the world and to be just really damn good at what I do. And right now I say I'm looking forward to hiring more people who are far smarter than me and know far more, and for them to be really good at what they do and me to just enable that and get out of their way so they can succeed. For me, it's about creating something that people are really proud of that they're doing, because they're doing great work, they're challenging themselves, they're learning, they're on the edge of really great commercial work, but they can also feel good that they're changing the world at the same time.
Yeah, right. That's a powerful answer. I love it. I think the only thing to say about that is that it's a really noble ambition to kind of be so aware of what you feel and what you need in yourself to be happy and content with work, to the extent that you can make those conditions, work and bring the right things together for that to be a possibility. And I feel like some people out there in the world of work definitely feel trapped or controlled really to some extent by the environment in which they're in. So it doesn't have to be that you have to walk away and start your own company one day, but actually from what we're describing, there are ways in which you can make the conditions of work, suitable for you and in a way that would be positive, fulfilling, impactful, all the things that you're describing. And I think all of the tricks that all of the stories that you've been able to share today through setting up your own business will help people in those organizations do some of those things. So I really appreciate the chat. Thank you.
And I think the one build I'd probably say on that, Chris, as well, is if you think about the scope of the world's problems, it's really easy to get overwhelmed. I as one person, cannot solve climate change. I cannot solve poverty. I cannot solve food scarcity. There's so many things I can't do. To my mind, that doesn't give me necessarily the right to then say, well, I'm not going to take any action. Any little action, no matter how small, can make a huge difference. And for anyone who's working in an organization where you don't have to go and start your own business, you don't even have to change jobs. If you are someone who, I don't know, is just a coder who thinks, hey, I just program some stuff, find a way to pass the knowledge on to someone else. That's meaningful work. Go and find a pro bono or a charity or something where you can volunteer that bit of expertise you've got that can change the world. Find a local organization that does work, whether that's joining up with your local CFA, CFS, SES, great volunteer organizations, all the way through to one day a year go and help clean up the local nursing home or plant some trees. Like, it doesn't have to be these big grand gestures. Every tiny little action we make that leads up to life of purpose can make a difference. So I'd encourage anyone to think more broadly about how they can use their skills and how they can use what they can do to make the world just that little bit better. It's a little incremental change that will make the difference. And when you think about your next company you might be looking to work for, check out what their corporate social responsibility policies are. I dare say most organizations have them, or they've got the appetite to do some good. Again, organizations are full of people and people want to do good. So I think even just starting the conversation, you might find management is incredibly receptive. Previous companies I've been at didn't have B Corp, didn't do any of this sort of stuff. And the second we said, hey, what about B Corp? A dozen hands went up and people said, we'd love to do that. We want to be a part of that. All it takes is a spark. And from that, amazing good can come.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Just take somebody to speak up or to articulate that thought in some way. And then if it's out there in the world, in a team or even just out in the world more generally, then it can act as a beacon. People can obviously gravitate towards that. And then action can start from there, but it needs somebody to come forward. So if you're thinking it, then usually there's a way of converting that into some positive action. So yeah, I really appreciate that thought as well. Thank you. There's one more question, which is just like super practical, but you work with a lot of data. You've talked about overwhelm. For the people that are just like, this is too much. Like, I can't read anymore. I can't take any more in. What are some of the strategies that you use for basically being able to walk away from data and re-energize and come back to a fresh perspective?
I think for me, probably two things. One is the power of the subconscious. I've always been amazed at how often, and I think we'll all relate to this, when you sit and try and bang your head against a problem and you're at your desk, you give up in frustration, you get up and you walk away to go make a cup of tea and you get 3 steps out the door and there's the light bulb moment. You got it, solution. So I think for me, one is the power of the subconscious. Just get away from it and know that just because you're not at your desk doesn't mean you're not working through a problem. The subconscious is orders of magnitude more powerful and it does some amazing things. Step away, let the subconscious take over. And for me, just find things that give you energy and purpose and meaning and make you happy and give you a dopamine hit. For me, that's, I've built a little home garage, so I go and do a workout, or I've always got a couple of instruments nearby that I might grab and noodle out a few things. For me, just having that moment to refresh and do something totally left of field, moving the body or, getting some kind of random creativity firing, refreshes and you step back to it with a new sense of purpose. So for me, be comfortable stepping away, do something that gives you the hit, and you'll find often a solution will come to you.
Have some chocolate. No, I'm joking.
Preferably low sugar.
Yeah, exactly. We won't advise on that. But yeah, really appreciate the chat again. Thanks so much, Joel. And yeah, we covered some interesting areas, and I appreciate you kind of bearing with me as I kind of think about random, obscure kind of ways to tie it all together. But yeah, it's been really cool. Thank you.
Love it. Thanks for having me along, Chris. It's been a good conversation. Thank you for the questions.
Awesome.